Al-Qaeda has a new home base. It is the Islamic Republic of Iran. We need to acknowledge it. We must confront it. Indeed, we must defeat it.
All right, so let's start with some updates that have been coming in from Indonesia that has suffered yet another earthquake. At least about 34 people are now reported to have died, while hundreds of others have been wounded in this deadly quake that hit Indonesia in the early hours of the morning. According to reports that are emerging, at least about a dozen patients in a hospital are still said to be trapped underneath the rubble in a hospital that is said to have collapsed because of this earthquake. Rescue operations are presently underway in the devastated region, and officials fear that the death toll could actually rise even higher. The earthquake measured about 6.2 on the Richter scale and hit Indonesia's Sulawesi Island at 1 o'clock in the wee hours of the morning earlier today. The epicenter of the earthquake is said to be 6 kilometers northeast of the city of Majene, and the epicenter is about 10 kilometers deep under the earth.
Well, after airstrikes targeted Iranian militia in Syria on Tuesday, a senior U.S. official is claiming that the Israeli attacks were carried out as a result of U.S. intelligence. While it's widely believed that Israel is responsible for many recent hits on Iranian targets in Syria, the public admission of coordination between Israel and the U.S. on these strikes is extremely rare. The U.S. official, who requested anonymity while speaking about sensitive national security matters, said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo discussed the airstrike with Mossad chief Yossi Cohen, and that they had a public meeting in a popular Washington restaurant, Milano, earlier this week. Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 40 people were killed in the Tuesday strike, including 9 Syrian troops, and the rest were Iran-backed fighters. It said 37 were wounded.
A couple of hundred people gathered in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, in the early hours of Thursday morning to start their journey to an improbable destination, the United States. It's a far cry from the thousands in the caravans of 2018 and 19 who hoped that by sheer force of numbers they could make it to their promised land. But the last one didn't get further than Guatemala, and this time too the country is deploying security forces and demanding COVID tests from anyone wanting to cross. Even if they make it further up the route, the Mexican border's equally tough. So why try at all? The answer for many is that they're desperate. After a double whammy of tropical storms in November, many people have been left with next to nothing.
A huge fire swept through the Rohingya refugee camps in southern Bangladesh in the early hours of Thursday, destroying homes belonging to thousands of people. The UN refugee agency, UNHCR, said more than 550 shelters, home to around 3,500 people, were either totally or partially destroyed in the blaze, as well as 150 shops and a facility belonging to a non-profit organisation. UNHCR said it was providing shelter, materials, winter clothes, hot meals and medical care for the refugees displaced at the camp in Cox's Bazar. No casualties were reported, and officials said there had been no decision on whether shelters would be rebuilt or refugees moved elsewhere.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden unveiled a nearly $2 trillion COVID-19 relief plan on Thursday, urging lawmakers to act fast and jumpstart an economy pummeled by the pandemic.
The crisis of deep human suffering is in plain sight, and there's no time to waste. We have to act, and we have to act now.
The aid package includes some $1 trillion in direct relief to households and roughly $440 billion for small businesses and communities particularly hard hit by the crisis. For the unemployed, benefits would increase from $300 to $400 a week, and a pause on evictions and home repossessions would be extended until September. Biden also pledged to vaccinate 100 million Americans in his first 100 days in office.
김정은 동지께서 조국과 민족 우선만리 앞에 쌓아올리신 기병 상징 종대를 선두로 이번 열병식을 엄숙히 거행할 35개 도보종대와 빨리까지 내뻗치는 조선의 힘이 발산하고 있습니다. 불과 5년이라는 짧은 기간에 5천년 민족의 수건을 이루어 이 땅에 영원히 전쟁이란 말을 모르도록 국가 핵무력 완성과 로켓 강국의 역사적 대업을 완수하신 것은 만고절세의
강대한 우리 국가와 인민의 위대한 힘이시고 이걸 자랑하는 모적의 주체 병기, 다전발 공격 무기, 초대형 방사포. 명장의 손길 아래 우리 포병 무력은 주체와 현대화가 가장 완벽하게 실현된 강유력한 병정, 가장 무서운 공격가. 참혹한 동란의 회오리 속에 전 세계가 뒤흔들려 정렬하는 입장식이 시작됐습니다.
Yes, there's a travel ban from Brazil and actually I think 14 other South American countries and also Portugal because there is this new variant. We've seen these variants before. There are thousands of them, of course, but some of them which are more easily transmitted are obviously of greater concern. And it's really as a precautionary principle. We're so close now. We've got 3 million of these vaccines in people's arms in the UK. We want to make sure we don't fall at this last hurdle. So it's really a precautionary principle. It's come in and people can't now travel from those locations. So we had a look at this particular mutation as opposed to the many other thousands very carefully, saw that there may be an issue, not so much that the vaccine won't work. In fact, scientists think that it will work, but just the fact that it's more spreadable.
There may be less than a week until Donald Trump leaves office, but a late-term foreign policy change has been criticized by top officials in the United Nations and the World Food Programme. They say that the White House's Sunday decision to label Yemen's Houthi rebel group a terror organization could cripple shipments into the country that imports 90% of its food and further deepen the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
We are struggling now without the designation. With the designation, it's going to be catastrophic. It literally is going to be a death sentence to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of innocent people in Yemen. But this designation, it needs to be reassessed, it needs to be reevaluated, and quite frankly, it needs to be reversed.
So at a press conference at his home earlier, Bobi Wine, he claimed he was winning this election by a long way. He called this election the worst case of rigging in Ugandan history. He used the phrase daylight robbery, and he accused soldiers of intimidating people and stuffing ballot boxes. He said in some parts of the country people didn't vote at all. Now, he stopped short of directly calling for any kind of action, but he did say whatever we do will be lawful, suggesting he might make a more direct call to action from his supporters. So he said he'll make another announcement later in the day, so we'll wait to hear what he has to say then. The Electoral Commission has responded to these claims by Bobi Wine, saying he needed to prove these accusations. They defended the transparency of the process and said that the internet blackout, which has been throughout the country since yesterday, hasn't affected the transmission of the results in any way. That's been disputed by several opposition candidates who say they've not been able to effectively observe the tallying due to the internet shutdown.
Now, thousands of newly declassified documents on UFOs from the CIA now accessible on the internet. And you can thank a UFO enthusiast for that massive dump of docs, now known as Black Vault.
It's not just space geeks who are fascinated with UFOs. The part of them being unknown in many aspects has people coming back to seek out more information. And now the floodgates are open, with the CIA releasing declassified documents that could potentially provide answers. The Black Vault is a site with published documents from the government. Most of these have been obtained through FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, which is how many journalists get their information from government sources. The creator of that site, John Greenwald Jr., a UFO enthusiast who's been sending Freedom of Information requests to the Department of Defense for years, shares what he's obtained. The site now has some 2,700 pages of declassified documents from the CIA.